Almost exactly 2 years ago, on January 15th, 2022, we had our official launch service in Final Fantasy XIV. And during that first official service, I wanted to do a level set on who God is and on who we are at VR MMO Church, our vision for Final Fantasy XIV, and the kind of community that we want to cultivate. And I still have all of my notes from back then, and I'm going to repeat part of now what I said at launch. Jesus said in John 13:35, "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." And I find it very interesting that he uses the word if here. So I looked it up in the original language, and it means if. It's conditional, meaning that if we don't love each other, we're not reflecting who he really is. And I don't know what kind of background you come from. Some of you or someone you love may have been hurt by someone in the church, and maybe even in the name of Jesus. And if you have been, I'm so very sorry. That is not how it's supposed to be. The church isn't a building or a service that you go to on Sundays. It's a community of people, and people mess up. But the good news is that that's not who God is. He loves us more than we could ever imagine, and he commands us to love each other. But we often mess up, and we end up showing judgment and hate and hypocrisy instead of love. And if you or a loved one have been on the receiving end of that, then again, I'm so very sorry that you had to go through that. That's not what we want here. We, the leaders of MMO Church, are not coming here claiming to be perfect or better than anyone else. Just because we may have the title of pastor or bishop or elder or whatever, we're still human and we're still going to mess up, and we're still learning as we go, just like everyone else. We want to be a safe and approachable place by the burned, the broken, and the rejected, and even the curious. And we want to create a community where people care for each other and do life together. And we want to create an environment where people feel safe asking and discussing the hard questions that with respect and dignity. We may not always have the answers, but we can seek them out in his word together. And by the church not reflecting who God really is, what's come out of that is a skewed, misrepresented view of his character. People can be afraid of him. We can tend not to trust that he even cares about us or that he has our best interests at heart. And we can see him as hateful and angry and vengeful. And again, the good news is that that's not who he is. We don't have to be afraid of him, and we can trust him to do what's right and what's best. And I went on to say that we were going to spend some time reintroducing who God really is and what he's really like. And I invited people to stick around as we deprogrammed or deconstructed our views of him. And now, 2 years later, on our 2-year anniversary of our official launch, we have different people here now. It's been a while, so I want to level set again. So we're revisiting the character of God. In Exodus 34, 6-7, it says, "The Lord passed by before him and proclaimed, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in loyal love and faithfulness, keeping loyal love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. But he by no means leaves the guilty unpunished, responding to the transgression of fathers by dealing with children and children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation." This is the first and most quoted description of God in the Bible, and it seems contradictory because it's mentioning both love and judgment. And it seems like there at the end that it's punishing innocent people. So we need to figure out how to reconcile this and make sense of it. And I bring this up often, but we need to study everything in the light of the greatest command. In Matthew 22, Jesus says, the greatest command is love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your intelligence. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. The law and the prophets refers to all the commands set forth by God in Scripture. And that means all the laws that are set forth by God are based on this concept of divine love, including all those rules that feel like they're taking the fun out of life. We talked about divine love last time, and I included the link in the Bible app list if you want to go back and check that out. It's in there. But since all of his commands are rooted in love, anytime we see something in Scripture that seems hateful or mean, we need to pause and dig into that because we're missing something very important. So if we look at the definition of divine love from last time, it's not just an emotion, it's not just a passive feeling, and it's not fleeting. It's an action and a choice as we actively work towards the well-being of others without expecting anything in return. This kind of generous love reflects the very heartbeat of God. And each trait mentioned in Exodus in this passage relates to each of the other traits. All of these character traits are rooted in loyal love and mercy. And this means that everything God does is rooted in love and mercy. One of those traits mentioned is that he's compassionate. And the root word for compassionate is the Hebrew word rachum, which is derived from the root word rechem, which means womb. And it has an emotional connotation like the deep love a parent has for a child. Or for those of us who don't have children, think of the love that we have for a pet or a loved one. His love for us goes even deeper than that. He has this deep emotional compassion for us, and he wants us to have this compassion for each other. In Ephesians 4:32, it says, "And be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving one another, just as God also forgave you in Christ." This is where his graciousness comes in. Grace means favor in spite of what's deserved. For example, forgiving someone who's greatly wronged you. You can't have this extraordinary grace without a generous heart. And God shows more generosity and grace than anyone else because we have countless examples of us throughout history betraying him over and over again, hurting him and each other over and again. And he lets us choose how we live our lives, and he allows us to face the consequences of our self-destructive behavior. But when we own up to our mistakes and cry out to him, he consistently responds with grace and forgiveness every single time. And at the same time, we need to be careful not to take his grace and mercy for granted. He's patient with us, or as it says in Exodus, he's slow to anger. His anger is not his main trait, although a lot of us think of it that way. I did for a long time. Sometimes God brings severe consequences in response to human evil. And his anger is a reaction to selfish and destructive human behavior, and it's rooted in his love. He gets angry when we hurt and oppress each other. He gives his people plenty of warnings and plenty of time to respond to his gracious warnings. But if we don't respond and we continue down our path of self-destruction, he'll express his anger and he'll hand us over to our own self-destruction. I was listening to a BibleProject podcast that was talking about this concept of chaos waters in ancient cosmology and about the original Hebrew context. And it had to do with creation and how everything in the beginning was chaos and how God holds back the chaos. And when we see events in the Old Testament, for example, when the ground broke open and swallowed up a whole bunch of people because they had started worshiping other gods, because they had lost faith in his power right after he had rescued them from slavery in Egypt, at the same time that Moses was on the mountain receiving commands from God on their behalf. The original Hebrew implies that he took his hands off the chaos and released it. And he took responsibility because he was the one that holds it back. So it wasn't a direct act of anger, it was more him showing them how huge of a role he's actually playing in keeping the destruction at bay. And this is what happens when you rely on the power of other gods, meaning that those other gods don't have the power to hold back the chaos and destruction. And this is what we still see today when he allows us to sit in our own self-destruction. And that's a very different thing from a vengeful God who's just looking for a reason to strike us down with lightning. He's slow to express his anger because he wants to give us a chance to turn away from our wrongdoing. He remains loyal to us in spite of how badly we keep hurting and betraying him and each other. In Hebrew, the word that you often see translated as loyal love is chesed, which is the most common word used to describe him in the Hebrew Bible. And it's really hard to translate that into any other language because it's a very rich meaning with multiple concepts rolled into one, including unconditional love, loyalty, and generosity. Like a good and loving parent, he loves us exactly where we are, but he loves us too much to leave us where we are. And he's on a mission to rescue us from our own self-destruction. And God knew that we would keep repeating this self-destructive cycle and that we would continue to spiral into chaos. So he made a promise a long time ago that he would one day finally end this cycle of evil and self-destruction. And he's kept his promise because he sent his grace, which is favor undeserved, in human form, in the person of Jesus. And he came to take the consequences of our own self-destruction on himself so that we don't have to suffer those consequences. I want to say that again because I want you to really get what's going on here. Really stop and think about this. It wasn't God sending someone else. He wasn't detached from what was happening. God and Jesus are one and the same. God himself came in human form to take the consequences of our evil and self-destruction on himself. We're the ones that hurt him and each other over and over again, creating our own chaos and destruction. Yet he still took all that chaos on himself. And he did that because that's who he is. And this is his generous and gracious gift to us, and all we have to do is accept it. And when we can finally grasp what that means for each of us, it will open our hearts and empower us to show his love to those around us. So based on this new understanding of those acts of God in the Old Testament, by his actions and his behaviors, we can see that he's consistent to his character. And the root word describing this trait is emet, which is full of faithfulness and truth and trustworthy. And it has a connotation of stability and reliability. It's someone who won't distort justice or take bribes. And it makes me think of a good and trustworthy judge. And that sounds like an amazing God that I really want to get to know. So the problem comes in with the last part of this passage in Exodus 34:7, where it says, "But he by no means leaves the guilty unpunished, responding to the transgression of fathers by dealing with children and children's children to the third and fourth generation." That seems very contradictory. This is another example of why it's necessary to study and learn ancient biblical context. This phrase, third and fourth, is an ancient figure of speech, which means whatever number. And I guess in our day, we would use the phrase however many. In this context, it means whatever number of generations of people who repeat their ancestors' destructive and evil acts. So it doesn't mean that innocent people are being punished for parents' wrongdoing. If we look at generations even now, we can see children often learn the wrong behaviors from their parents and are still held accountable when they do wrong. So he'll deal with each generation as necessary based on their own actions and their own state of heart. And also notice that there is a low number of generations because it only says the third and fourth that are punished, compared to the very large number of blessed generations, which is thousands. He's a good and loving God, and he is a good and trustworthy judge, and he will deal rightly with each of our hearts. And that's what it means to be compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in loyal love and faithfulness. And I mentioned at the beginning, there's the Bible app link if you want to dig deeper. I provided study resources, and I will share that link again. It will be in the show notes for those watching this on demand. But I'm going to put it in Twitch again real quick, if it's not showing in history. And if you scroll down to the self-reflection, I've posed a bunch of questions. So I want you to check them out and really take the time to think through them. I'm going to stop the stream, and we're going to stop the stream and discuss this in Discord. Feel free to stay for the discussion in Discord off stream. And if you're on demand, watching this later on demand, check out that link in the show notes. So I'm going to pray us out, and then we're going to keep discussing this off stream. Thank you again, Father, for everyone in our community, for those that could make it, those that couldn't make it. Please touch each and every one of their lives this week. Let them see the real you, this real, amazing you that is compassionate and gracious and slow to anger and abounding in loyal love and faithfulness. Help them each to see a glimpse of the real you this week and throughout their lives. And let us think on these things, not just go away from here and forget everything that we've heard, but think on what this says and think on what this means and how we should respond as people that are so incredibly loved by you. How should we want to behave towards you and towards each other? Help us to really ponder this and think on it. Ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.